The world had seen war before, but never like this. In the early years of World War II, Allied pilots ruled the air with confidence, believing no enemy could challenge their dominance. Then one morning, a new sound rolled across the sky, a deep, mechanical growl that silenced every conversation in the radio waves. It wasn't thunder. It was the Focke-Wulf Fw. Born in the factories of a collapsing Reich, it would rise to become the most feared machine of its time. Faster than fear, stronger than reason, and ruthless in its precision. Every Allied ace who once believed himself untouchable would soon face a simple truth: the hunter had become the hunted. This is not just the story of a fighter plane. It's the story of how arrogance met innovation, and how one underestimated machine changed the balance of power in the skies forever. The story begins in 1939, in the industrial heart of Germany, where smoke from factories painted the skies black and the echo of hammers never stopped. Deep inside the Focke-Wulf workshop in Bremen, a man named Kurt Tank was designing what many dismissed as impossible, a new kind of fighter plane, one that could outclimb, outgun, and outlast anything in the air. At the time, the Luftwaffe already had its star, the Messerschmitt Bf 109, sleek, famous, and trusted by German aces. No one saw a reason to replace it. But Tank did. He believed the next war would demand more than speed. It would demand raw power, a machine that could take damage and still fly, a plane that could dive into chaos and come out alive. So while others laughed, he built his dream around a massive BMW 801 radial engine, an engine that growled like thunder. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't pretty, but when it roared to life for the first time, the hangar walls trembled. The engineers paused. They knew something had changed. The first prototype, the Fu-190 V1, lifted from the runway like a bullet tearing through history. Early flights were dangerous. The cockpit boiled with heat. Oil leaked. The propeller sometimes screamed under pressure. Test pilots risked their lives, often landing in smoke and sweat. Yet Kurt Tank kept improving, testing, redesigning, every screw, every wire, every panel. He wanted perfection, not praise. Slowly, the Fw-190 evolved from an experiment into a weapon. Its wide wings offered stability. Its short fuselage gave unmatched agility. And its guns, 4 20mm cannons and 2 heavy machine guns, promised devastation. Meanwhile, outside the factory walls, Europe was burning. Poland had fallen. France was next. Britain stood alone across the Channel. The Luftwaffe dominated the skies, but cracks were forming. Allied pilots were learning, adapting. The Messerschmitts, once unstoppable, were meeting equals. And in the background, the Fw-190 waited, like a wolf watching from the shadows, unseen but ready. By mid-1941, the time had come. The first Fw-190A squadrons took to the air over France. The British Royal Air Force spotted strange shapes slicing through the clouds. Aircraft faster than their Spitfire Mk V, deadlier in a dive and more brutal in combat. When the first dogfight ended, the message was clear. The sky no longer belonged to Britain. News spread fast. "The Germans have built a new fighter," whispered the pilots. "It's unbeatable." The Allied command refused to believe it, until their own men came back shaken, describing a grey machine with a howl like a storm. Even Winston Churchill demanded answers. Kurt Tank, hearing the chaos from afar, said only one thing to his engineers: "They laughed when we began. They're not laughing now." In that moment, the balance of power in the air shifted forever. What began as a sketch in a smoky German factory had become the butcher bird, the Focke-Wulf Fw-190, and it was about to change the war. Summer 1941. Across the English Channel, Royal Air Force pilots carried the confidence of heroes. They had survived the Blitz, pushed the Luftwaffe back, and believed the worst was over. Their Spitfires were legends now, symbols of courage, freedom, and victory. But that belief would soon shatter. Because above the clouds, an unfamiliar sound was coming, the harsh metallic growl of the Focke-Wulf Fw 190. When the first sightings came from the French coast, radar operators thought it was a mistake. The enemy blips moved too fast, climbed too high. The radio crackled with confusion. Then came the first engagement, a routine patrol turned nightmare. 4 Spitfires of number 41 Squadron met 4 FW190s near Le Touquet. Within minutes, 2 Spitfires were flaming wrecks falling into the channel. The survivors limped home, their voices trembling. It outclimbed us, outturned us, outshot us. At first, the RAF didn't believe it. Reports of a new German fighter were dismissed as combat panic. But the losses kept coming. Pilots who had once laughed over coffee before takeoff now flew in silence. The FW190 attacked from the sun, dove through formation like a knife through glass, and vanished before anyone could react. Its 20mm of cannons tore through wings, engines and hearts alike. The psychological impact was devastating. The Spitfire, Britain's pride, was suddenly the hunted. Dogfights that had once felt noble now felt desperate. The air over France turned into a graveyard of burning aluminum and falling parachutes. For the first time since 1940, the RAF was on the defensive again. In London, Air Marshal Sholto Douglas demanded answers. Intelligence officers began gathering every scrap of information. "What is this new enemy?" they asked. Photographs from reconnaissance flights showed a stubby-nosed aircraft with broad wings and a brutal stance. It looked heavy, yet somehow it danced in the air. Engineers studied the images and realized the truth. This wasn't evolution, it was revolution. The BMW 801 radial engine gave the FW190 unmatched power at low and medium altitudes. Its wide landing gear made takeoff stable, even from rough fields. And its cockpit visibility let German pilots fight with confidence. It was fast, up to 410 miles per hour, but more importantly, it could hold that speed in a dive where Spitfires faltered. Within months, the RAF's kill ratios reversed. Veteran aces who once dominated the skies were dying in minutes. Newspapers stayed silent, but the pilots knew. In the mess halls, laughter disappeared. Cigarettes burned shorter. Every mission briefing began with a single sentence whispered like a prayer. "If you see a 190, don't chase it." Meanwhile, over occupied France, Jagdgeschwader 26, led by Adolf Galland's protégés, flew with growing confidence. They painted victory bars on their fuselages and called their mounts Würger, butcher bird. Each sortie fed their legend. Back in Britain, engineers worked day and night to create an answer, the Spitfire Mk IX. But until it arrived, the RAF could only endure. For every Allied pilot who took off that winter, one truth echoed in his mind: the sky had changed hands. The Focke-Wulf had arrived, and fear now wore wings. By the winter of 1941, the once confident skies over Europe had turned into something darker, colder. Allied pilots began to feel it before every mission, that tightening in the chest, that silence before the engines start. The Focke-Wulf FW190 wasn't just another plane anymore. It was a ghost in the clouds, a hunter no one could predict, no one could outrun. The men of the Royal Air Force had names for it now. The butcher bird, the screamer. Some said its guns sounded like tearing cloth. Others said it was the last sound you ever heard. Those who survived a dogfight described it the same way: fast, merciless, unstoppable. The moment it appeared, it owned the air. Every pilot had a story. Squadron leader Geoffrey Wellham recalled flying his Spitfire over the French coast when his formation came under attack. The first pass lasted less than 5 seconds. He saw nothing but streaks of light, cannon fire slicing the sky, and then his wingman's aircraft broke apart, spinning toward the sea. There was no warning, no chance to fight back. "It felt," he wrote later, "like being hunted by something not human." In the black and white newsreel shown back home, the war in the air still looked glorious. Smiling pilots beside their aircraft, waving to the camera. But behind those smiles was exhaustion and fear. Many were barely 20 years old. They would eat breakfast with friends who'd never return for dinner. The constant losses wore down the soul of every squadron. The FW-190's armament was devastating. 4 20mm MG 151 cannons and 2 13mm MG 131 machine guns, 6 mouths of fire that could rip through bombers or fighters in seconds. One burst could turn a Lancaster into a falling inferno. British engineers studied the wrecks and couldn't believe how precise the damage was. The German pilots didn't just shoot, they aimed for the heart. Inside the cockpit, Allied pilots described the feeling of powerlessness. They'd dive, twist, push their aircraft to its limits, but the Focke-Wulf was always there, closing in, engine roaring like thunder. Many Spitfire pilots died before even seeing who killed them. Their final moments were flashes of tracers, the shudder of impacts, then fire. Even the German pilots, despite their victories, felt the strain. Some admitted they could smell the burning fuel from enemy aircraft and see parachutes drifting like ghosts in the sky. "You do not celebrate a kill," one Luftwaffe ace said later. "Oh, you survive it." The Allies grew desperate for answers. They needed hope, something to break the FW-190's aura of invincibility. Then in June 1942, that chance arrived. A young German pilot got lost, returning from a mission, and mistakenly landed his FW-190A3 on a British airfield. The ground crew surrounded it in disbelief. For the first time, the enemy's secret was in their hands. Engineers rushed to dismantle it, study it, and learn its every weakness, but until that knowledge could turn into action, fear still ruled the skies. Every mission over France was a gamble between life and death, and the FU-190 was the dealer. The war had entered a new phase. Victory no longer depended on courage alone, it depended on who could master the machine. When the captured FW-190 was rolled into the hangar at Farnborough, a stunned silence filled the room. British engineers circled it like archaeologists who had just unearthed a monster. The grey paint was scorched from combat. The guns still smelled of cordite. On the fuselage, the black cross of the Luftwaffe looked like a scar. For months, the Allies had fought this phantom. Now they could finally touch it. As they stripped it down, the truth became clear. The Germans hadn't built magic, they had built mastery. The Focke-Wulf was brutally efficient, thick armor, wide landing gear, perfect balance, and a radial engine that refused to quit. Its design was clever in its simplicity, easy to maintain, fast to repair, and deadly in the air. Every bolt, every panel spoke of function over form. One engineer whispered, "They built this to win a war, not a beauty contest." Across Britain, the discovery triggered a race against time. The Supermarine team worked day and night on the Spitfire Mk IX, fitting it with the new Rolls-Royce Merlin 61 engine to close the gap. Pilots knew it had to succeed, not just for victory but for pride. The sky had become a symbol of morale. Losing it meant losing faith. By the summer of 1942, the counterattack began. Over the French coast, the Spitfire Mk IX met the FW-190 head-on. Gone was the imbalance of speed and power. Now both machines were equals. The duels were brutal. The air filled with twisting trails of smoke as silver and grey silhouettes spiraled against the clouds. Tracers lit up the sky like lightning. Pilots blacked out under G-force, regained control, and fought on. Each dogfight was a heartbeat away from death. Pilots spoke later of the strange calm that came when they saw the enemy at 50 yards. The tightening of gloves, the steadying breath, the focus that pushed fear aside. For minutes that felt like hours. They fought as man against man, machine against machine. The FW-190 was still formidable, its roll rate unmatched, its firepower devastating, but the Spitfire Mk IX could finally keep pace. When the first British pilot downed a 190 and returned alive, the radio chatter across bases erupted with cheers. "We can beat them!" one voice shouted. It wasn't just victory, it was rebirth. On the other side, German aces began to notice the shift. Their advantage was thinning. The once invincible butcher bird now faced an enemy that had learned, adapted, evolved. Her tank's creation was still feared, but fear alone couldn't win a war that was now being fought on science and stamina. Yet even as the tide began to turn, the FW-190 refused to fade quietly. It adapted again, transforming into a ground attack variant, the FW-190 F-Series, built to strike tanks and convoys. From Normandy to Stalingrad, it dove through flak and flame, hammering Allied columns with rockets and bombs. It was no longer just a fighter. It was a weapon of endurance. The skies above Europe were changing once more. The balance was fragile, the air thick with vengeance and smoke. The counterattack had begun, but the war for the skies was far from over. To outsiders, the Focke-Wulf Fw-190 was a machine, cold, metallic, and mechanical. But to the men who flew it, it was something far more intimate, a living creature of steel and breath, a partner in survival. Inside that cramped cockpit, surrounded by instruments and the smell of fuel, every vibration carried a message. The FW-190 didn't just fly. It spoke to its pilot. Men like Otto Kittel, Walter Novotny, and Erich Rudel trusted it like a comrade. They had seen the front lines burn from above, heard the clatter of flak shells bursting beneath their wings, and watched the horizon flash with tracer fire. The FW-190 became their armor and their identity. When they climbed in, strapped the harness tight and slid the canopy closed, the outside world vanished. The only things that mattered were the hum of the BMW 801 engine, the heartbeat in their chest, and the enemy somewhere ahead. For Kittel, one of Germany's most successful aces, the FW-190 was a symbol of balance, power without fragility, aggression without recklessness. He would later say that when the engine started, you stopped being afraid of death because you already belonged to the machine. In the frozen skies over the Eastern Front, he fought swarms of Soviet aircraft alone, returning with his fuselage torn, fuel leaking, guns overheated. Yet the aircraft brought him home every time, until one day it didn't. Inside the cockpit, conditions were brutal. The controls vibrated violently during dives. The temperature could drop below freezing, and the oxygen mask often froze over from condensation. Sweat mixed with oil, gloves stiffened from blood. Pilots wrote letters on scraps of paper before missions, small notes tucked in their jackets, knowing each flight might be their last. "Tell my mother," one pilot wrote, "the bird still flies strong." On the Western Front, Nowotny's squadron earned a reputation for precision. They were called the Hawks of the Channel. Each mission followed the same rhythm: take off at dawn, climb into a sunless sky, hunt the bombers, vanish into the clouds. They measured time not in minutes, but in bursts of gunfire. The moment a B-17 appeared through the mist, instinct took over: throttle up, aim steady, 1 second of cannon fire, and then the sudden silence of falling wreckage. But behind every victory was fatigue. Pilots began to see patterns. Friends who laughed too loudly the night before, men who polished their boots as if preparing for a ceremony. Those were the ones who didn't return. By 1943, even the aces were running on ghosts. They no longer believed in medals, only in moments, surviving one more mission, one more dawn. The FW-190 demanded courage, but it also demanded surrender, a complete trust in its strength. And though its pilots were soldiers of a crumbling Reich, many fought not for politics, but for the man flying beside them, for the unspoken brotherhood in the clouds. Up there, amid smoke and sunlight, humanity and machine became one. The world below was chaos, but in the cockpit of the FW-190, for a few fleeting moments there was order, terrifying, beautiful order. By 1944, the sky over Europe no longer belonged to Germany. What once felt like an endless victory had turned into survival. The Luftwaffe, once unstoppable, was now fighting with broken wings. The FW-190 still roared through the clouds, still clawed at the air with the fury of its past glory. But the world beneath had changed. The war machine that once powered it was collapsing, inch by inch, factory by factory. Allied bombers filled the horizon, B-17 flying fortresses, B-24 liberators, escorted by the new American Predator, the P-51 Mustang. Sleek, fast and long-ranged, it followed the bombers deep into German airspace, something the Luftwaffe never imagined possible. The hunters had become the hunted again. WW190 pilots now fought not for conquest, but for the defense of what remained of their homeland. Fuel was running out. Every mission began with a calculation, not of targets, but of survival. Could they reach altitude? Could they make it back? Pilots who once flew 4 sorties a day now sat grounded, waiting for fuel that never came. In airfields scattered across ruined towns, mechanics stripped wrecked planes to keep others alive, patching wings with scavenged metal, painting over bullet holes that never truly healed. The enemy seemed infinite. Allied factories in America and Britain built thousands of aircraft each month, while German production fell under the weight of bomb raids. Even Kurt Tank's own facilities were hit, assembly lines reduced to rubble, engineers buried under twisted steel. Yet somehow the FW190 kept flying. Against every odd, it remained a weapon of defiance. The men who flew them were younger now, some barely trained, others drafted straight from school. They wore uniforms too large, helmets that didn't fit. Many had never even seen combat before their first mission. Their commanders, once legendary aces, now watched with hollow eyes as these boys took off, knowing most wouldn't return. One German pilot, Hans Dortenmann, remembered the silence before takeoff. "You could hear the wind through the hangars," he said. "No laughter, no music anymore, just engines and fear." The once proud roar of the Luftwaffe had turned into a whisper of desperation. When the FW190 met the P-51 in battle, the duels were different now, no longer dances of skill, but acts of defiance. The Mustangs had speed, height, and numbers. The Germans had experience and desperation. In black and white film reels you can still see it. Silver and grey streaks twisting across the sky, smoke trailing from shattered wings, parachutes opening against the clouds like final prayers. The FW190 remained lethal. Its cannons still tore through bomber formations, but the sky had turned into a storm of fire. There was no escape, no victory, only endurance. Every mission ended with the same question: how much longer could they hold on? By late 1944, many Luftwaffe squadrons were gone. What survived was courage, thin, exhausted, but unbroken. Even as cities burned and hope faded, the pilots climbed back into their Focke-Wulfs. The butcher bird, once the terror of the skies, now fought not for dominance, but for dignity. The winter of 1944 was the beginning of the end. Germany was collapsing from every direction. The Red Army from the east, the Allies from the west, and the skies above filled with thunder that never stopped. For the Luftwaffe, the air had become a graveyard, but the men who still flew refused to go quietly. They turned to what they had left, the Focke-Wulf Fw190, the butcher bird that had once ruled the sky. In the ruins of airfields across France, Holland and Germany, the Fw190s stood like tired predators, wings patched, noses blackened but engines still alive. Mechanics worked in freezing hangars by candlelight, using scraps of aluminum torn from wrecks. There was no more perfection, only function. Each plane that rolled onto the runway was a miracle stitched together from desperation. Kurt Tank's engineers had transformed the aircraft again, creating new versions like the FW190A8 and the F-Series ground attack models. These were no longer elegant fighters. They were battering rams of steel and flame. Under their wings hung rockets and 500-kilogram bombs meant for Allied convoys and armored columns. When they flew, they didn't soar, they roared. Their missions had changed too. No longer hunting Spitfires in clean duels. They now dove into waves of bombers, B-17s, B-24s, and Lancasters, spewing cannon fire into their formations before being torn apart by return fire. The sky became chaos. Hundreds of engines, tracer rounds like falling comets, black smoke rolling through the clouds. Survivors said it felt like flying through the end of the world. The FW190A8RH Sturmbok variant was built for these suicide-like battles. Its armor was so heavy that it could barely climb, but it could survive a direct hit. Pilots called it the Flying Fortress Hunter. They would approach from behind the Allied bomber stream, enduring a storm of bullets, then unleash their cannons at close range. Many never came back. Those who did landed with trembling hands, faces grey with exhaustion. One pilot, Willy Maximovitz, returned from such a mission with his canopy shattered, his uniform burned, and his right hand bleeding from shrapnel. When asked what kept him going, he said quietly, "Because the others still fly." It was no longer about orders, or the Reich, or medals. It was about duty. To the machine, to the men beside you, to the ghost of what used to be victory. On the ground, civilians looked up and watched these black silhouettes vanish into clouds. To them, the roar of the FW190 was both a curse and a comfort, a reminder that even as their cities fell, someone was still fighting. Mothers covered their children's ears. Old men saluted. And the pilots kept flying. Every takeoff felt like the last. The air stank of gasoline, the runways were cratered, the control towers half destroyed. Yet still, the FW-190s rose, fire trailing from their exhausts, wings shaking, courage burning brighter than the bombs that followed them. The butcher bird was dying, but it refused to fall silent. Its final cry was not one of defeat, but of defiance, a scream of fire and steel that echoed through a sky already lost. While Europe burned, and the thunder of Allied bombers never stopped, one man in Germany still refused to surrender to despair, Professor Kurt Tank, the creator of the Focke-Wulf Fw-190. To him, the aircraft was not just a weapon, it was an idea, a symbol of German engineering, of what innovation could achieve even in the darkest times. Tank knew that the FW-190's glory was fading, but he also believed that evolution was the only way forward. If the skies had changed, then so must the bird that ruled them. Inside the last surviving design halls in Cottbus and Marienburg, Tank and his remaining team worked under bombardment. Windows were shattered, blueprints singed at the edges, yet they continued, sketching new wings, longer fuselages, and engines that could climb higher than any enemy. Out of the smoke came his next masterpiece, the TAR-152, a high-altitude interceptor built from the bones of the FW-190. Refined for a war that was slipping away, the TAR-152H1 was unlike anything before it. A long-winged predator designed to strike Allied bombers where they felt safe, above 35,000 feet. With its Jumo 213E engine and pressurized cockpit, it could reach speeds near 470 miles per hour, faster than a Spitfire, faster than a Mustang at that height. In tests, pilots reported that it felt alive, responsive, smooth, like holding lightning in your hands. But it came too late. Factories that once built thousands of aircraft now produced only dozens. The Allies bombed every rail line, every hangar. When the first TAR-152s finally reached operational squadrons in early 1945, Germany was already dying. The men who flew them, like Josef Kiel and Willy Reschke, described the strange mixture of pride and hopelessness. "It was the best machine I ever touched," one said. But the sky was already lost. Kurt Tank watched his creation take flight one final time in February 1945. Standing on a snow-covered airfield, coat whipping in the wind, he saw the TAR-152 vanish into the clouds, elegant, silent, unstoppable. For a brief moment he smiled. Even as the Reich crumbled, his dream of perfect flight had survived. But when the Allies reached Cottbus weeks later, the dream ended in dust and ashes. After the war, Tank was captured, questioned, and later moved to South America, where he continued designing aircraft. But he never forgot his butcher bird. In his notebooks, he called it his proudest failure, a machine that proved how brilliance could exist even inside tragedy. "We built her to defend," he wrote, "but she became a reminder that power alone cannot save you from history." Today, when historians speak of German engineering, they speak of Kurt Tank, the man who gave the sky its sharpest edge. And though the FW-190's roar has long faded, his vision still soars in every aircraft that carries its legacy, in every engineer who dreams of perfection amid the chaos of war. When the guns finally fell silent in May 1945, Europe was a graveyard of twisted steel and silence. The Luftwaffe was gone, its airfields blackened scars across a defeated nation. Yet among the wreckage, Allied engineers found something remarkable: the remains of the Focke-Wulf Fw-190, still standing proud amid the ruins. Bullet-riddled, wings torn, engines seized, but its shape spoke of brilliance. Even in death it looked fast. Teams from Britain, America, and the Soviet Union descended on captured German bases to collect anything that still moved. They measured, photographed, dismantled, and studied every inch of the Fw-190. What they discovered changed aviation forever. Its broad landing gear, simple, rugged, almost unbreakable, became the new standard for fighter design. Its cockpit ergonomics, with instruments arranged around the pilot's natural line of sight, were years ahead of their time. Its radial engine cooling system, its roll rate, its balance of armor and agility, all were copied, refined, reborn in the jet age. American test pilots at Wright Field could hardly believe it. One report read, "The Fw-190 exhibits control harmony unmatched in any Allied aircraft. The US Navy's Bearcat and the Grumman F-8F Hellcat both drew lessons from it. The Soviets, too, borrowed its toughness and low-altitude performance for their LA-9 and Yak series fighters. What had once been the enemy's terror had become their teacher. For historians, the Fw-190 became more than a machine. It was a symbol of what happens when engineering meets desperation. It represented the razor's edge between genius and ruin. While the Reich it served collapsed into infamy, the aircraft itself transcended politics. Pilots who once cursed its name later admitted respect. "It was the perfect opponent," said one British ace. "You hated it because it reminded you what a real fighter should be." In post-war museums, the few surviving Fw-190s were restored piece by piece. When their engines turned over again decades later, old veterans stood frozen, tears in their eyes. That sound, deep, guttural, defiant, pulled them back through time. It was no longer a roar of war, but a heartbeat from history. Black and white photos could never capture what it meant to hear that engine again. The memories of friends lost, battles fought, courage tested. The legacy of the Butcherbird lived on in silence. In textbooks, in hangars where young engineers still whispered its name. Even today, when pilots take modern fighters into the sky, they carry echoes of the Fw-190. The idea that speed and strength are nothing without balance. That beauty in flight comes from purpose, not pride. And somewhere, perhaps above the clouds where no war can reach, the spirit of the Focke-Wulf still flies. A reminder that even in mankind's darkest chapters, creation and destruction can share the same wings. Time has faded the colors of that war, yet the memories still drift like smoke across the horizon. The men who flew, the machines they trusted, and the skies they once owned, all have become ghosts in history's endless archive. But some ghosts still whisper, and one of them carries the sound of a radial engine echoing through time, the Focke-Wulf Fw-190. Today, only a few of them remain. In quiet hangars in Germany, Britain, and the United States, restorers work patiently, polishing aluminum that once bore the scars of battle. When they run their hands along the fuselage, they feel the dents, the bullet holes, the history trapped in the metal. And when that old BMW 801 engine rumbles to life, the sound shakes the air, not with violence, but with reverence. Veterans who hear it close their eyes. Some smile, some cry. For them, it isn't just a sound. It's the voice of youth, courage, and loss. At air shows, when a restored Fw-190 takes off, the crowd falls silent. It climbs through the clouds, its propeller cutting the sunlight into silver ribbons, just as it did 80 years ago. In that moment, war becomes memory and memory becomes art. The plane rolls gracefully, banking left, its dark silhouette sharp against the pale sky. For a fleeting second it feels as if time bends, the past and present merging into one beautiful, haunting frame. Historians still debate its legacy. Was it the finest piston fighter of the war, or merely a product of its era? Powerful, yes, but doomed by the empire it served. The truth lies somewhere in between. The FW190 was not born of hatred or conquest, but of engineering brilliance, a creation that outlived its creators. It proved that even in times of horror, humanity's drive to innovate never stops. For those who fought against it, it was terror in the clouds. For those who flew it, it was survival. But for those who remember it now, it is simply a story. A story about man and machine, about ambition and consequence, about how the sky never truly belongs to anyone. It only borrows its heroes for a while. As the sun sets over restored airfields, the FW190 sits silent once more, its wings catching the last light of day, casting long shadows over the grass. And if you listen closely, when the wind passes through its frame, it almost sounds like breathing, because the sky, even after all these years, still remembers. It remembers the roar, the fire, the fear, and the courage that tried to rise above it all. The men are gone, the nations have changed, but their echoes remain. The Focke-Wulf Fw190, underestimated, unstoppable, unforgettable. Its war is over, but its story will never land. The skies may be quiet now, but their stories still speak. Every aircraft, every mission, and every fallen pilot holds a piece of the past that shaped the world we live in today. The echoes of courage, sacrifice, and innovation still drift through time, and we are here to keep them alive. If this story of the Focke-Wulf Fw190 moved you, then join us in uncovering more hidden chapters of history. This is not the end. It is only one of the countless secrets buried within the Second World War. There are more untold stories waiting to be revealed, and more forgotten heroes who deserve to be remembered. Subscribe to WW2 Historical Secrets and become part of a journey through time, where we bring to life the machines, the men, and the mysteries that defined an era. Because history is more than what we read in books. It's what still whispers through the skies. Keep the past alive. Keep the truth remembered. Subscribe now and discover the secrets that history tried to hide.